Hey everyone, my name is Elio Narciso. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ScaleStack. Welcome again to the Revenue Engine Master podcast. We usually dive deep into a lot of interesting topics, for me at least, and hopefully for my guests and for you that are listening, around like go-to-market and sales ops, marketing ops, and in general, cutting-edge ways in which we can transform how revenue engines are built today. Today, I'm joined by Eugene Berson, who is the head of sales ops at Miro. Eugene and I met at a dinner in San Francisco recently, and have kept in touch. And he has an incredible background in building and scaling RevOps across like really cool companies like Slack or now Miro. And he's well known for his expertise. He was like introduced to me by someone that I admire. And he's known for his expertise in aligning like cross-functional teams and implementing data-driven strategies and like for really innovative RevOps practices. And so what I think in my last few conversations with Eugene, what I think, Eugene, what sets you apart, in my opinion, is in the clarity around structure and frameworks, especially in a very noisy go-to-market environment. And I really love that. And I know that you are also an advocate for unifying strategy with execution and never forgetting that like they are both important. Sometimes people forget about the strategy part. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation. Welcome, Eugene. Anything that you want to add about like your experience or like any introduction that you want people to know about as we begin?
Yeah. First of all, Elio, thank you for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. Not too much to add, other than in this world, it is noisy, like you said, and I think it's really important to have clarity of like what outcomes you're looking to achieve, and any process, any vendor is really a means to that impact that you're looking to drive. So particularly when things get noisy, I really try to kind of have that North Star in mind and work backwards from there. And I'm sure we're going to get into that as part of this conversation.
Very good. Welcome again, Eugene. And so I always like to start from how did we get here? So how is, what's been your journey to, for you to become who you are now professionally? You've scaled like RevOps at Slack, for instance, which is a company that everybody admires, and now Miro, which is also a company that many people admire. I'm curious about the beginning and what career experiences have shaped your current philosophy. Maybe if you can walk us through your journey, that would be awesome.
Yeah, of course. So I started my career as an investment banker. I joined Morgan Stanley's technology group and did that for a couple of years, and was with another smaller boutique bank for a couple of years after that. And that experience was definitely very formative in a sense that really made me appreciate and understand the finance side of the equation, the unit economics, the three statements, because ultimately, while you of course want to drive customer value, it has to be a sustainable business that attracts investment. And particularly because that was my first job out of school, I think that was real. It really shaped the way I approach things, and I really lean into the partnership with the finance organization as a RevOps leader. And we'll probably talk more about that as well. But I think in order to be successful, you really have to be a bridge between go-to-market and your CRO and the finance organization and kind of the unit economics involved with your CFO. So that's kind of how I got started. And then
And so when you say statements, you refer like to profit and loss and the balance sheet. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Very good.
Exactly right. And particularly in the area that we are in, it's a lot of the SaaS KPIs that are sometimes non-GAAP metrics, but we've come to kind of accept as a standard evaluation criteria. But yeah, after my stint in finance, I somewhat serendipitously fell into kind of enterprise PLG SaaS. I first started with SurveyMonkey, which was a beloved brand, and a company that was probably the one of the first ones to do PLG. Back in the day, it was called freemium. And then same thing, different name. And then from SurveyMonkey, I went to Slack, and that was kind of an interesting story because while I was at SurveyMonkey, we were beta customers for Slack, and so I saw firsthand as an end user kind of the value and productivity and collaboration that Slack was unlocking. So it was a no-brainer for me to kind of pursue an opportunity when one came up. And so I joined Slack about 6 months before we launched an enterprise go-to-market motion. At the time, Slack was squarely focused on the self-service approach. And then about 6 months into my time with the company, Stuart Butterfield, our CEO, brought on a head of sales, and that head of sales brought in, quite a few other leaders that followed him to the company. And I kind of raised my hand to be part of that journey, not having much sales ops experience at that time, but kind of learned on the job, and it was an incredible ride to grow the business. One thing I will say that Slack really got right at that point in time is it was an all-in investment into the enterprise. So we brought in a very experienced head of sales, like I mentioned, and we stood up a dedicated enterprise team on the product side, and there was other executives and go-to-market leadership that was brought in that had experience with enterprise, and that I felt that was really, especially in retrospect, that was really powerful in helping us move quickly.
And also very interesting because at the same time, Slack is known for having this lighter tone, like, less formal, like from the user perspective. Mm-hmm. And super easy to work with, to use. There is not real enablement that you need to do. So I think Slack is actually one of the best examples of B2B software the way it should be. I often make the example that as a consumer, we use Instagram or TikTok or Airbnb, and these are apps that are flawless in their capability to be used, to understand how you should do things on them. And Slack is another great example in the B2B side, but it's one of the few, if not the only, I would say, because a lot of the B2B apps and solutions and software are pretty terrible, and they're not as easy to use as it should be, or as it is in the consumer space.
Yeah, no, I agree, and a lot of folks will call that consumerization of the enterprise, and really making the end user experience clean, powerful, pleasant, and that's where the PLG model really thrives, because you can attract end users kind of seamlessly through a self-service experience. But the dirty little secret of software is that as you move up market, you're now no longer selling to end users. You're selling to economic buyers, and economic buyers have a different set of requirements and goals that they want to accomplish with the tool. And I think that's where you're right. Slack did a really good job of maintaining that balance of kind of end customer love and solving for the end user, while continuing to add more enterprise grade functionality. But since I've left the company, you can see that there's additional features and SKUs that are being added, and naturally, the platform evolves to become a little bit less easy to adopt from the get-go.
100%.
And that's just a natural evolution, frankly. It kind of, there's the saying that the only way to make money in business is bundling and unbundling. And so Slack did a fantastic job and kind of unbundled the kind of the text-based collaboration or chat-based collaboration. But then now Slack is being rebundled, obviously, as part of the Salesforce ecosystem at large. And so that bundling and unbundling naturally creates wedges for incumbents to come in.
Yeah, I love all of this. This is so I think interesting, because the observation, which only an insider has, which Slack actually pursued an enterprise strategy, but then maintained for a while, that PLG approach to being simple, easy onboarding, easy like start using it, etc. It's super interesting, and it makes sense that Slack was so successful. But now, as part of a huge company like Salesforce that caters to larger like enterprises and like has a history of, I think, overcomplicating products,
Mm-hmm.
is like it's gonna be curious. I'm gonna be very curious of how it evolves, and I cannot really agree with you that like you can see some of the issues there.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, and back to kind of like my comment about having an appreciation of this finance side of the equation, as businesses grow, the majority of the revenue shifts from new business to expansion. And so, because you already have hopefully a loyal customer following that's getting a ton of value from your simple product, you can start to layer in more complexity, and they're not starting from nothing. They're starting already from a level of appreciation and awareness. And so I think that also contributes to the dynamic that we just described.
Very good.
Yeah.
One of the best classes I took when I did an MBA was accounting, which is like pretty like if you ask like a random person, like I don't think that they would say accounting was their best topic, but there was this really fantastic professor who would be able to extract super strategic, interesting knowledge from the three statements that you were referring. So like, the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. And just by reading that with knowledge, you learn so much about a company, maybe even things that the people that work at the company don't even know. That's why like we have analysts and an entire ecosystem. So it's great that, that's how you form, I think, that initial like insight about like you need to be strategic and then execute, but like you need to understand like, the details in order to see the forest.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. And maybe like just staying on like the the roles that companies like Slack, these are like Slack, Morgan Stanley, and then SurveyMonkey. These are all companies with very different DNAs. What is like a common thread that you have identified, and instead what is different, and how those things have like shaped your understanding of systems and operational scale and all of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say, so for the last three places I've been at, so Slack, Asana, and Miro, all three companies have a product founder, a founder who is a real visionary in kind of creating a new product category. In the case of Slack, it was chat-based collaboration. In the case of Asana, it's project management in a much more transparent and kind of a programmatic way. In case of Miro, it's visual collaboration. All these are kind of new product categories that didn't necessarily have budget against them, and there was real evangelism and founder-led sales that was needed to get them off the ground. As the companies matured, sales becomes more professionalized, and you've got segmentation, and you've got different go-to-market playbooks and motions that start to form, and you staff and resource it accordingly to kind of optimize for velocity and scale. But yeah, I would say the common thread is the companies that can professionalize sales at the right point in time, and like with the right resourcing is what kind of creates differentiation. What I mean by that is, if you want to move up market, which is kind of a common playbook for growing your revenue and growing the business at large, do you have enterprise product market fit? Is an important question for you to ask, because let's take Slack as an example. Slack is the type of business that gets better the more users you put on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
if you have some people communicating in email, some people communicating in Slack, some people communicating in like Google Chat, that's just asking to create silos. So it's a business that lands itself to that land and expand and going wall to wall. But you have to do it carefully, because if you have a proliferation of channels, Slack channels in which you're in, then you all of a sudden have too much noise, and you can actually create a negative experience all of a sudden.
Mhm.
And similarly, like with Asana, you've got tasks and projects that you're managing. But if you all of a sudden have a view into what the entire company is doing, and your company is thousands or tens of thousands of employees, you can just start drowning in notifications and kind of what is it that specifically I'm accountable for and need to get done.
Yeah.
So understanding that product market fit for the size of the company that you're targeting is really important. And that should inform your product roadmap. It should inform your prospecting strategy. It should inform the role and the profile of the sellers that you're hiring. It should inform your post sales
Mhm.
staffing. And so, kind of that um, acknowledgement and understanding of what is it that you're targeting as you're moving up market is really important to set yourself up for success.
Amazing. This is super interesting also for scale stack, to be honest. I mean, we're thinking about a lot of this stuff all the time because we are like serving like enterprise customers, but yet we want to maintain like the product, like if you want, like product is very pure in many ways. And so like you have to be very purposeful, like, not to like bundle it with features over features over features. And then you lose like the initial like clarity of vision, which like at the end of the day, I think any great product is born out of like a fantastic insight into what's needed in the market. And like that insight is usually very simple. But then as you build the company, you add complexity. And I think like figuring out the equation of like maintaining that product vision, which is simple, and yet catering to customers in different segments and hopefully like going up market, is not easy. And it requires like constant strategic like thinking and iteration and all of that. Really interesting stuff. Maybe I want to transition into like, something that you and I have talked about, which is exactly like the dilemma, if you want, strategy versus execution. And you've mentioned to me in the past that like you feel that like RevOps leaders sometimes fall into the trap of being like overly executional and losing sight of the strategy. And so I'm very curious if you can expand on that. What's your thinking and what's your take on fixing that disconnect? Maybe bringing like some personal experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's definitely kind of an age-old dilemma that has no silver bullet, but I'll share some observations on it. I think one is you know I've come into companies where I've inherited RevOps teams as an example, and a lot of those RevOps teams were built for a different phase of the company. Maybe inbound demand was really strong, and so you had to be really good about lead routing and enrichment and just like setting up certain basics. Um, but then you evolve, and all of a sudden, like I was saying earlier, there's multiple motions, and maybe the tools that you brought in are either not configured appropriately, or
Mm-hmm.
they're configured kind of with a one size fits all approach, and the nuances left to individual segment leaders to tailor, and you kind of start to lose control a little bit, or maybe metrics aren't set up because the business was just growing up and to the right, and you regardless of which strategic choice you might have made, especially in the hypergrowth phase, you can't tell if it was the most optimal choice because you know that the business in general is growing because you have a fantastic product and momentum and followership that's happening. And so there's just like less, the downside risk is negligible, if you will. And you're continuing to grow. And so that's an environment where RevOps is just like trying to keep up pace with growth and making sure that leads aren't dropping, and we're able to like paper deals in a way in which we can actually book the revenue. Right, those are kind of like the early days challenges, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in that honeymoon period. But inevitably,
Which, how long it is, you think?
yeah, I mean it depends on the business, right? Depends on the category in which you're in, but fundamentally, you'll have kind of a group of early adopters And depending on the competitive landscape, if
Mm.
you are first to market and you don't have a lot of competition and you're clearly proving value, and there's strong word of mouth, that can be maintained for a while. But imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So if you're having success, inevitably you'll attract competitors. And like in the case of Slack, there was plenty of kind of like ankle biters, if you will. But then Microsoft Teams came and launched,
Right.
something and gave Microsoft Teams and gave it away for free. Or in the case of Miro, you've got Lucid and Figma and various other long tail
Super
players that are
competitive.
coming
Yeah.
in. Microsoft has a whiteboarding solution. So I think that your honeymoon period is basically defined by, in a big part, by the competitive landscape in which you're in, and obviously like the size of your addressable market. But yeah, once you get past that honeymoon period, and you really have some tough choices to make, because ultimately, running a company is a capital allocation exercise. Do you invest in product? Do you invest in distribution? If you're investing in distribution, are you investing in sales and growth? Are you investing in retention and adoption? And so these are all the things that you have to be really intentional about. And maybe there's never a like clear cut one right answer, and I think that's okay. What's really important is to kind of like document and communicate your perspective internally, so that way all the functional leadership on the executive team is kind of aligned to effectively the math equation
Mhm.
behind uh, what you're doing to achieve your plan. And so I think if you do that, then you can create a lot of clarity for the rest of the organization and minimize people getting in each other's way. Because really the biggest risk from growth and scale is that you create redundancy, you create conflict unintentionally, and therefore you kind of like are your own worst enemy. And so if RevOps can help shed some clarity on that and really um, uh, create kind of like the rationale and and like I was saying, the math equation behind what you're trying to achieve, I think that can really allow the company to move fast even at scale.
Fantastic. Very, like I love the clarity of thinking here. So, like for the math equation to work, I think, first you need like a number of things. And like I want to dive deeper there in a second. But first, there is like the alignment, like you said, like you talked about the honeymoon period. I mean, that relates often to like people's relationship. And you talked about like communicating often and communicating with clarity. What's the strategy, that to reach that, math equation solving. So, how do you see the partnership between the CROs and RevOps? I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding sometimes from CROs about the role of RevOps,
Mm-hmm.
but then when they see in action, good or bad RevOps leadership, like it becomes immediately clear. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do you envision this partnership? What are like the ingredients to make it work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think RevOps, if kind of at its worst, can become a ticket taking queue, and you're kind of always reactive and firefighting, and that
Yeah.
does not lend itself to fulfilling work for the people doing the job first and foremost. Or you're trying to do strategic fulfilling work and firefighting at the same time, and people end up burning out. And so that the relationship between the CRO and their head of RevOps is paramount. There needs to be a level of trust there. The RevOps leader needs to be kind of part of the leadership team and an insider into the good, the bad, and the ugly that the CRO is dealing with. They should be calling each other uh, in the evenings or texting each other, but it needs to be a very, very close relationship for things to work. And the sales leader, RevOps or CRO, and RevOps leader can and should be challenging each other. If it's always a one directional kind of like go
Mm.
to type of relationship, It's not going to work because there could be blind spots that the CRO has, or you get back into kind of like that ticketing queue mode,
It
which
becomes
is
the firefighting. Hey, we have this problem,
which is
solve
not
it.
fulfilling.
Yes.
And so I think it's okay to let some fires burn is the answer. Because there's always too much to do. And so there needs to be that acknowledgement and kind of like handshake between the CRO and RevOps. The RevOps leader, just like the CRO, should have a pulse on the organization by investing into relationships all the way from the standout individual contributors to the L1 leaders and above. So both the CRO and RevOps should have their own independent relationships, and then they should have a pulse on what's happening in the industry, what our best in class companies are doing, and that allows those two leaders to have a conversation around like what is the state of affairs, what are the goals that we're trying to drive towards, and what are some fires that we're going to let burn. Because if in the alternative, if every smolder becomes a fire and the CRO says go fix it, you start to lose line of sight to the goals that you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, and also the credibility, no? Like if you're just an executioner and then like, you don't offer like the higher level vision and, going back to the math equation and why are we doing certain things and how we should be doing things in order to achieve the ultimate goals. Yeah, it becomes a very one-way relationship, which often leads to even if like the RevOps leader like does what the CRO asks, eventually like he or she loses like the credibility, and that's inevitably a fail. I think absolutely very interesting stuff. And so let's assume we have like a strong, confident RevOps leader and like a good partnership with the CRO. What about the team underneath? And I'm curious about both like, the people in the RevOps teams, but also underneath the CRO, VP of sales, and the reps that often have like, go and knock at the door of the RevOps teams and like file tickets and all of that stuff. How do you think like should we manage the team underneath, both like in sales to get them educated about like things that like maybe the RevOps teams is doing, and also the RevOps teams itself in the sense of like how can we empower them and coach them to shift from firefighting to proactive execution?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's a couple things to think through there. One is there's really like two types of RevOps. There's business partnership RevOps, where you like the RevOps leader is what the RevOps leader is to the CRO. That's a strategic business partnership relationship, and you
Yeah.
can kind of like cascade that down to geographic or segment leadership, and those quite senior go-to-market leaders will have their own RevOps partner. And
like an HR type of equivalence, like the HR partners that people have to manage their teams.
That's right. Yeah, there's a HR business partners, and then you would have your RevOps business partner, and that creates kind of like that inner circle that exists at the CRO level, but it can and should exist, at the geo level, and companies with sufficient scale, maybe even at the geo segment level as well. And that's where you talk through, how you can talk through people and kind of like skill will matrices of like do I have the right team to do the job? You're helping with QBRs, and you're prepping kind of insights to look back to inform your strategy looking forward. You are helping with forecasting. You're helping with territory design and things like that. So there's kind of like that category of RevOps professionals. And then there's what I call like center of excellence, which is the quote unquote back office portion of revenue operations, but is super important in order to keep the train on the tracks. Because without that center of excellence piece, each pod at the geo level, segment level, they're going to be reinventing their own wheel. They're going to have a proliferation of G sheets and all of a sudden, there's a fraying of definitions, and that's where things can go wrong. And so kind of having that center of excellence layer, and that's where oftentimes tooling will come in, where, okay, this is the way we forecast at this company. This is the way we report on, closed won at this company. There's this is the way we do, this is the sales process that we have, and this is how we do handoffs from sales to post sales. There needs to be kind of like that layer of global definition that is sufficiently clear and has guardrails, but also leaves room for individual segments and geos to kind of provide their own finesse onto it. And so for the head of RevOps, you have to acknowledge the business partnership and the horizontal kind of center of excellence piece of it. And frankly, you've got to do both. You can't do one or the other. You have to do both.
Very, very interesting stuff. You mentioned tooling and related to the center of excellence. And then earlier you mentioned like the math equation. Let me dive a little bit deeper there. First of all, like the math equation to me, and maybe it's different for you, but like to me it speaks of like, what is the foundational data model, right? How do we get to hit like our revenue numbers, our goals and all of that? And so like, what is the model that gets us there? Is that a good interpretation of the math equation that you're referring to, or you have like a slightly different?
It's yes, and I'll just kind of like double click on that quickly. The businesses I've worked for are all kind of land and expand businesses, and so for the land or the new business piece, it's how many leads am I going to get, and what is the conversion rate of those leads with a certain average win rate and deal size. And so that gets me to kind of like my new business expectations. And then there's the expansion portion of it where I have existing install base and I'm expecting a certain, gross retention rate and net retention rate off of that install base. You put the two together and that's essentially your math equation. Of course, you can like go to layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 level metrics, but that's really what I'm talking about.
In one of the recent conversations, you like drew a distinction between like the system or systems of engagement. Think about the gong and the outreach, and the systems of orchestrations. And I thought it was a very interesting, like simple mapping of all of the tooling. And so you mentioned like, earlier, like the center of excellence, like, need to own like, the processes and the systems and the tooling. My perception is that like in the go-to-market tech stack space, we have overinvested in systems of engagement and underinvested in developing like really robust systems of orchestration. Is that something that you share? And like, if so, like, what do you think this orchestration layer should and it needs to deliver? And what have you done? Because anyway, you need to deliver, like to build that model, that data model, in order to essentially do what these systems of orchestration should do.
Yeah, so I do think, like you said, there's the engagement layer and the orchestration layer, and let's kind of unpack both of these. For the engagement layer, we are coming off of an era where companies were kind of buying best of breed tooling. And so what that meant is, you go to LinkedIn Sales Navigator and you do some account mapping and, persona research there. Then you go into Zoom Info and you do, some additional enrichment to get the email address or the phone number of that individual. And then you've got to, make sure those records flow into Salesforce. And then you're going into your sales engagement tool like Outreach to send the sequence. And then, you're using the standard Google Suite to do additional follow-up emails. So, and then, if you're a product-led business or frankly any business, then you've got like a Looker dashboard or something else that you've got to review to understand the state of your customer. And so the constant piece of feedback from the field is that they're swivel chairing. They have to go to different places to
Yeah.
get the information that they need. And so the trend right now is consolidation, right? All these best of breed vendors that were acquired by companies, the scope of their solution was only so wide at the time when the purchase was made, and all of them have encroached into each other's spaces. And so not only do you have a swivel chair problem, but you also have a tooling underutilization problem, because they've grown in their product offering. So I think now more than ever is a very important time to evaluate your tech stack, and you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. You can lower your cost by consolidating vendors, and you can improve the day in a life for a sales rep by giving them fewer places to go for that layer of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, flipping to the system of orchestration, in general, I found that like RevOps teams, my teams, have been resourced in a way where really the expectation is like you're provisioning the tool and you're doing very little beyond that to ensure success. And if you're lucky, you have a customer success manager on that from that vendor who is in your Slack instance, who is having regular calls not only with RevOps but with actual end users. They're collecting feedback and they're giving you metrics and data on how that tool is performing. And that's if you're lucky, right? Now it's hard to find an excellent CSM. But what ends up happening is that you as a company are essentially beholden to the vendor to kind of like configure things in a way in which you want, and that and that to me just like gives me a little bit of anxiety and uncomfortableness, because nobody is going to know the business better than you know the business, and you should be able to move dynamically and nimbly to configure it to accommodate the nuances of your business. And so to me, the orchestration layer is kind of like a multi-headed problem. One is you just have to resource it appropriately internally within the company. If you're just resourced to provision the tool, then the value you're going to get is going to be impacted accordingly. So that's number one. Second, you need to, if you're going to have the resourcing, that resource internally needs to intimately understand the product and the impact it's looking to achieve. And that means, you have certain metrics that define success, and you have a firsthand relationship with the end users to get the feedback directly from the field. And you can impact and shape the roadmap of that vendor, or you can deploy the new features and functionality that they're rolling out in a way to service your needs. And so that's kind of that piece. And then finally, and I'm sure Elio we will want to dive here, is like the ability to orchestrate today is multiplying because you've got AI. Whereas previously you had like very specific things that you had to like anticipate and create. Now we're in this age where experimentation can really be unlocked, and I'm specifically referring to the prospecting use case.
Mm-hmm.
Previously if I go back in time, you would enrich your leads with one vendor. And then we graduated and we said, okay, no one vendor is ever going to be successful. We're going to do waterfall enrichment. Okay, awesome. But now we're at a point like not only can you do the waterfall enrichment, you can get infinitely creative with what attributes you're going to look for to define your lead. And the important thing there is like that whatever you define cannot and will not be static. And so that's why you need to continuously monitor. Maybe you're looking at your users that have a Jira integration. That's something that's relevant for Miro, because Miro and Jira are products that go well hand in hand. But maybe there's other signals. Maybe there's people that are attending agile conferences, or people that are engaging on LinkedIn on a particular topic that you care about. The ability to experiment is now completely unlocked, and you need somebody to think creatively internally to do the experimentation, and you need a vendor that will allow you to not only use kind of like the predefined rails within the product, but also give you the agency to layer in quickly and experimentally anything that new that you might think could move the needle for your business.
I mean, this is music to my ears because that's how we are thinking about skill stack. Like you mentioned, like the importance of having like a real customer success that is like a partner with like on Slack that like responds quickly to your inputs and like deploys them. And then like that has clear metrics. And we see in all of our customers this like now increased expectation that, for instance, like if you have like poor data quality in your CRM, which I mean, if you ask like 10 companies right now, hey, are you happy with the quality of the data in your CRM? 9 out of 10, and probably 10 out of 10 will tell you no. But like until now, like there's been like so many priorities. But in the age of AI, which you mentioned as an important factor here to transition from what you called in a prior conversation, the dinosaur age of orchestration, essentially you cannot afford the luxury of assuming that the data in your CRM is bad. And you know, you need higher quality data. And so the metrics are very important. And so we have customers of SkillStack, they are setting like, okay, I need to get to 90% plus data fidelity. And then build on top of that creatively, which is also what you said, which is like, you know, hey, maybe there are like signals, mentions, or like airflow usage, or like, you know, whatever things which are important, or like hiring in specific job categories that may indicate like an interest to potentially buy the product that you're selling. Mm-hmm. And so all of that is how we're thinking, with one exception, which is like, you know, you mentioned also that like you feel anxious if you cannot play with the tools. And so here our perspective is that there's been a lot of like manual work that people have done, because we are like transitioning out of the dinosaur age of orchestration. And so there isn't like, you know, a place that you can easily do all of this stuff. And so people have deployed like ad hoc solution, duct tape solutions that require a lot of manual work. And we think that if we absorb as vendors of this orchestration layers, that complexity, RevOps teams can become more strategic and only think about the metrics and only think about the signals that will, you know, power the business forward, rather than like get their hands dirty, which it's an instinct that I understand, but that not necessarily, in my opinion, leads to better outcomes. It's only like a level of confidence. Oh, like, you know, there is a tool, but like really like it requires then that you actually work on the tooling yourself and that spend time and brain attention on that thing.
Yeah.
So that's,
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think I think a lot of us have been burned by
yes,
having a poor experience. So there's like this level of, the baseline level of distrust, if you will. But I think,
yes,
you know, how vendors like ScaleStack staff the post-sales experience is really what matters. And because not all CSMs are created equal, you know, based on level of
100%.
technical expertise, based on, you know, how many accounts they're managing, et cetera. And so I think that can be a real differentiator in a sales cycle, actually, to proactively acknowledge and describe the differences in philosophy and staffing, to kind of like win back that trust. The other thing I'd be remiss not to mention is, like, everything that we're talking about lends itself more to like a higher velocity motion. If you're going after like true enterprise, especially today, there's no substitute for kind of like in-person meeting and events. And so whether it's, you know, your sellers being at the right conference at the right time where their prospects are at, whether it's organizing, you know, small group dinners and having thought leadership content, there's no substitute for that stuff. And so technology can and should play a hand in like which accounts should be considered tier one, which of them fall into my ICP, which of them, like as you do your account research, which of them have a compelling event coming up that I can anchor around. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of value there. But the actual outreach in kind of in an email fashion, that lends itself more to like a higher velocity, lower segment play. For true enterprise, I'm of the mindset that you've got to do your account research. Know who the players are, map the org, but it's how do you get in front of your champions and economic buyers in person as fast as possible. That will help you accelerate your sales cycles and de-risk your outcomes. And just quote unquote kind of like hiding behind your computer screen, leveraging a very efficient tool is not going to be enough in today's age.
Yeah, I love that note. My perspective is that if you have a wide addressable market, then it means that the math equation and the data model becomes very important, because at scale, like if you have like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of potential customers, like you need good data to prioritize all of the efforts of your sales and marketing teams. Then the implementation, there could be different segments. And so the team of people that like going after the enterprises like will have to have its own sales process that will require like them to go to conferences and to go have dinners and stuff like that. And then maybe the mid-market segment will do different things, more partnership and develop different strategies to reach to that. And then maybe SMBs will have like a high velocity PLG motion. We have customers that have all of those three, but the underlying data model for them is so important, because then they can decide how to prioritize the efforts and which strategy to activate depending on which segment. We are already at time and I have many questions, so unfortunately we'll have to soon cut it short. Maybe on the last topic of AI, I think that the curiosity that I keep hearing over and over is that it will fundamentally change everything. I started my career in mobile technology when mobile phones were very dumb, and I was working in mobile tech back then. And, we started envisioning what will we do on our mobile phones 10, 15, 20 years. And everything that we thought and imagined we could do, video calls, watching, content, and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, have become true, and even more. So my assumption is that everything that we are imagining that AI will do will become true and more, but we'll find a way to incorporate in our human capabilities and activities and engagement. That's my optimistic perspective, which I believe. But I think that the uncertainty right now that I hear from a lot of RevOps people is how can we move forward from experiments to something that can actually impact at a larger scale the work that we do? And I'm curious about what is your perspective here, based on maybe your experience or some experiments that you've run. What is something that you think, okay, already today we can move the needle with AI?
Yeah. So for the businesses that I've been a part of, I've inherited an existing tech stack, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, where it was coming from this age of best of breed. And so I'm of the mindset right now is, identify the jobs to be done, consolidate the tech stack, and where chances are you're underutilized, even of the vendors that you keep, you're probably underutilizing the functionality. So to me, for a mature business, that's step number one. But then, if you have certain goals on, increasing your deal size, increasing shortening your sales cycle, improving conversion, whatever those goals might be, and you have a hypothesis of how you want to get there, if you run into a roadblock with your existing vendor, that to me is the catalyst to say, okay, let's evaluate somebody new, because then you're taking on some of that change management tax, if you will. Now, connecting to our earlier part of the conversation, you can kind of de-risk the change management if you're only innovating at the orchestration layer. If it's obscured in the background, you minimize the change into the day in the life of a salesperson. And so that's another way to kind of like experiment there. But ultimately, to reiterate, to me, it's the jobs to be done. What metric are you looking to move and how much? And if your current vendor can't do it, evaluate some new ones, network extensively, because I think right now there is a lot of kind of like noise, like we said at the beginning of the conversation. And it's kind of like picking people who you trust, who have a strong perspective and are maybe seeing some success. But yeah, if something is working and, fan the flame, why not? Because speed is what wins in this day. Speed of execution. And so if something is working, I would double down on it, and see how far I can take it.
Eugene, this was awesome, and I'm so glad that we did this. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to maybe record a part 2, because I have a lot more stuff to ask you about, and maybe we will have that chance soon enough. Thank you so much for your time. Again, this was great. A lot of good insights that I'm hoping the people that will listen to the podcast will absorb. And great framework also in terms of how to look at things. So thank you so much, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Elio. Thanks so much. And yeah, until next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.